Hello, everybody, and welcome back into another playoff preview show here at the Hockey Writers. Today, we're going to be previewing probably the most anticipated one of the second round. Here is the Battle of Alberta, which was in doubt. I mean, in the first round there, the Dallas Stars almost screwed that up with Jake Ottinger's Superman performance in Game 7, almost stole that series away from the Calgary Flames. But here we are. We've got the Battle of Alberta going, and I've got a couple writers here that cover the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames. Of course, Jim Parsons covers the Edmonton Oilers. He also does Oilers Overtime. And Colton Pankiw, who covers both teams, actually. He's on Oilers Overtime as well. He also writes for the Calgary Flames. So we've got them both here, going to be previewing this series. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. This should be fun.
It's going to be a fun series. I mean, my gosh, it's hasn't been since 1991. Long time. I don't even remember that. You know, it's I was 5 years old when that happened.
I was going to say I might be the only one in this group old enough to know what was going on in 1991.
So yeah, I was 5, so I don't really have much of a memory on I barely have a memory of 1994 when the Canucks went to the Stanley Cup final. So, and I was around 10 then. So, but yeah, this is going to be a real fun series. So we're going to do a bit of a preview here. Just to start out, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Season series doesn't seem to matter when you get into the playoffs. So, but you know, season series was tied 2-2. No one really had an edge there. Flames outscored the Oilers 17-16 through that season series. So again, not much of an edge. The Oilers had, of course, their power play was one of the best in the league last season. So Oilers were 7 for 16 on their power play in that series. Flames are 3 for 14. So I mean, the power plays may make a difference in this. And of course, the usual suspects were leading the scoring. Draisaitl with 11 points leading the way. McDavid had 7. Tkachuk and Gaudreau both with 8 points each. Not a lot of goals for them, but Tkachuk had 3, and then Gaudreau had only 1, but he had a bunch of assists. So we'll see how all this plays out. So let's start with the big matchup here is the Battle of the big stars here. Draisaitl and McDavid versus Tkachuk, Gaudreau, and that Lindholm super top line that had over probably close to 300 points this season. Colton, we'll start with you. How do you think this matchup will go? I mean, we'll see if they match up together on the ice, you know, if they're going to be matched together. But how do you see this matchup playing out over this series?
I think it'll be an exciting one. I think there was kind of some people upset maybe in the first round against the Stars that they thought it was a bit of a boring series. And I think this one will be a lot more open. Obviously, the Oilers are a high-flying offensive team. So as far as line matchups and everything, I think we'll have to see. I don't think Sutter's afraid to use that Gaudreau line out against McDavid. I think he trusts them. All of their two-way play this year was incredible. It's kind of shown if you just look at their plus minus and everything. So I think it'll be a fun series, but I think that top line of the Flames, there's a reason why many consider them to be the best line in the league, and I think it'll be tough for the Oilers to contain them.
Well, I mean, you're looking at Gaudreau. I mean, my gosh, he was snake bitten against Ottinger. He had so many chances in that game to score and finally did win it in overtime. So he may have a bit more open ice. I mean, he had a lot of open ice in that series. Basically why Dallas was in that series because they were good defensively and Ottinger closed the door. So let's look at the other side. Jim, I mean, talked about Draisaitl and McDavid all season long about how they, of course, dominated the scoring race again. McDavid came to play in the first series against LA. I mean, he led the way. He leads the playoffs in scoring. What do you think of an impact he will have on this series? And Draisaitl a bit banged up in that series too. Will he be 100% going into this one?
Well, McDavid, it's a matter of whether or not he's got another level, right? Like he came to play against LA and showed how much his will to win is actually there. Like the narrative that he's just setting single season, regular season records and winning trophies and all that stuff. He's trying to overcome that narrative. He is absolutely showing up in the playoffs. For me, though, Draisaitl is a major question mark. He is playing. Ken Holland did confirm on the radio today that he will be playing in game 1, but he will not be 100%. There's just no way that Draisaitl is, he's got a high ankle sprain. Like You can't overcome that in a week and a half. Like there's no amount of rest in one period of a week that's going to put you at 100%. The kicker for me is that McDavid, Draisaitl were consistent all year long. There were very few, like when they weren't going, it was very sporadic. Like they were consistent all year long, right? Whereas Calgary has some players that can be very, very good and very, very high end, but they don't always show up. They even weren't quite there at the beginning of the Dallas series. So I think if Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl can be effective throughout the series, that's an edge for them. If McDavid can find another level, that's a real edge for them. But the trick here is that Calgary has the ability to put those three guys on the same line. Edmonton won't. Like there won't be a McDavid, Draisaitl, Evander Kane line because you got two left wingers there, right? So there's really no situation other than maybe a power play where all three of those guys are going to be on at the same time. So they will probably, the Oilers' key to success here with these guys is to actually split them up and to probably just put them on the power play together and have them maybe kill in the last 20 seconds of a penalty or things like that, when you can get the combinations to get them together, but they won't play together on a regular basis. So they need to individually be really good and bring people to their level. So McDavid can do a lot of things by himself, but he still needs to get other people involved. And so does Draisaitl, right? That's the key to these guys really showing how good they are, is how much can they bring the other guys in, where Calgary's success could ride on those three guys. Like if those three guys are really, really good, they'll do well. If McDavid and Draisaitl can bring others with them, the Oilers will do well. That's just how it's going to go for them.
There you go. The depth, I think, is going to be a big difference in this series. Looking at from the second line to the fourth line on both sides. Before we get to the defense, Colton, looking at the depth on both these teams. I mean, Calgary, of course, bolstered their lineup at the deadline, and with Toffoli and guys like that. Toffoli finally scored in that series against Dallas. What do you think that'll have an effect on this series? We talked about the big boys at the top, but depth is usually the reason why teams succeed in the playoffs. Do you think Calgary has that depth to overcome Edmonton's depth?
On paper, I certainly do. But like Jim said, they were, especially to start the series against Dallas, they came out pretty slow. I know Dallas played well defensively, like you alluded to, and Jake Oettinger obviously was incredible, but it was a bit of a slow start for them. And they do have some guys in that roster that have not played up to par in the playoffs in the past. I think Gaudreau's gotten over that. He was really good in the series, but Matthew Tkachuk still was struggling. He was able to get a goal in the final game, like Toffoli, as you'd mentioned. So I think that Toffoli being able to get on the score sheet will help with his confidence a lot, but there's still some other guys like Blake Coleman doesn't have a goal. Dylan Dubé didn't get a goal in the series. So there's some other guys that on paper, it looks like a good lineup for scoring depth, but they haven't really brought it yet. So they'll definitely need some of those guys to step up in this series.
Yeah, Jim, on the depth side in the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, of course, always driven by the offense of McDavid and Draisaitl, but Nugent Hopkins has stepped up at times. Of course, Evander Kane, we all know what he's done this season and in the playoffs. How much will the depth come to play in this series when, they're probably going to need it to beat the Flames?
Well, the Oilers' top six has been awesome. Like Evander Kane is right up there in terms of goal scoring and points in the playoffs so far. And he just seems, ever since he came, like, you're not going to, I know I'm an Edmonton Oilers guy, but you're not going to convince me that there was a better free agent signing this year.
Yeah.
I think Evander Kane was the guy. Like best trade deadline, even though early acquisition of the year, best free agency signing for the best value, probably for anybody. Like he has been so good for the Oilers and he's been consistently good since he showed up. So that helps. Zach Hyman's been a workhorse. And even if he isn't scoring, he's offering a bunch of stuff, whether it's penalty killing, power play opportunities in front of the net. He's a grinder. He's killing the last couple minutes of every game. Like you said, Nugent Hopkins has stepped up. That depth, that top six is pretty good. Kyler Yamamoto's been playing pretty good. What I'm wondering is if the depth, like the bottom nine, the Jesse Puljujarvis and the Warren Fogels, the Derek Ryans, Zach Cassian, if those guys can show up in Calgary, they're great. They're in good shape. If they don't, it's a heavy load for the Oilers to kind of carry through an entire series. And I don't expect this to be a short series. So you need those guys to, especially because Calgary likes to play physical and shut things down. And the Oilers are going to need some of that from the Archibalds and Cassians of the world, right? So if those guys can show up and offer that depth, they'll be okay. But I'm not worried about like Evander Kane or Zach Hyman or Nugent Hopkins. I think those guys will be there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the top six are, of course, have produced, and I think that's probably what it'll be for both sides. I think it's just going to be those bottom lines that may have to, those tight games come through. So we'll see what happens in that case. Let's move to the defense. In Calgary, they're a really well-rounded defense core. They lost Chris Tanev, and didn't play Game 7, which is a big loss. Surprisingly, I know a lot about Tanev in Vancouver here, and injured a lot. Not much injury problems in Calgary. So it's going to be huge. And he was a big part of that defense during the regular season. Colton, how much will that play into this series if he is not available to play a lot in this series?
Yeah, I know he practiced today, which is a good sign, but obviously for him to get pulled out of Game 7 shows you that he's dealing with something pretty significant. So he's definitely not going to be at 100%, and that's a huge blow for the Flames. He's really kind of their rock back there. Whoever he gets partnered with always seems to benefit. Like last season, it was Noah Hannafin. This year, Oliver Shillington, and he's just who's ever beside him. Just it seems to elevate their performance. But there's still some other guys that are capable of stepping up on that blue line as well, like Hannafin that I had alluded to. Had a big season for the Flames. Rasmus Anderson put up 50 points. So it's a pretty well-rounded defensive corps, like you said. And I think at this point, at least on paper, going into the series, that's a big advantage they have over the Oilers.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they're really underrated defense. I think I've said that before. I think it was in the first preview for the first round. So we'll see how much Tanev plays. If he does play, how much how he looks. So we'll see. Jim, looking at the Oilers defense, of course, there's been a lot talked about them. Duncan Keith, Darnell Nurse was suspended in the first round for one game, but came back in Game 7. What do you think that defense will be like against the Flames in this series?
It's a question mark for me. Like there's a few things going on that I would be a little concerned about. One, when they are playing in shorter series or when they have quicker bursts, they seem to do just fine. But as series go longer and the playoffs go longer, guys like Duncan Keith, who are playing pretty well, will get tired. Guys like Darnell Nurse, who is the only real physical guy that the Oilers have on their blue line, will get worn down. Evan Bouchard is good, but his sense of urgency isn't always there, and he does have the tendency to make a couple mistakes here and there. Brett Kulak's a great skater, but he gets the crap kicked out of him on a regular basis, right? Like he takes a hit almost every game. Even Nurse has already been injured once or twice, right? Like they're all dealing with something. So Tyson Barrie's a really good offensive player, but there are question marks. So there's a little bit of something with everybody on this Oilers blue line.
Yeah.
If they play up to their level and the ability, and this isn't a 7-game series where maybe in the latter games they start to wear down a little bit and Duncan Keith doesn't look like the regular Duncan Keith that has been here all regular season, that's a problem for the Oilers, right? Because they simply cannot match up physically with the Calgary Flames defense. And there's not as much experience there, other than the fact that Keith, I think, has more experience in the playoffs than maybe anybody left in the playoffs at this point. But still, he's slower. And as the series goes on, it's going to last a little longer. And if Darnell Nurse can't keep his head in check, he could find himself in more trouble, right? Like the fact that he said, "Oh, I wasn't intending to headbutt anybody." Yeah, you were. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you absolutely were. So it's hard to know what's going to happen with this. It could be really, really good, and they could be super effective, or they could be totally outplayed by Calgary's defense, which I think, other than the flashiness of Gaudreau and stuff, is kind of the strength of the Flames over the Oilers.
Yeah. For sure. Another thing that's going to be huge in this series is we all know the physicality of that the Battle of Alberta brings all the time. Zach Cassidy, Matthew Tkachuk. It's going to be a huge battle, I think, throughout this series physically, and of guys that take penalties and who's going to get the special teams advantage. So I think that's also going to be a huge part of this series. So we'll see. It's going to be fun to watch. Let's move to the goaltending, which, again, a question mark for the Oilers throughout the season. Mike Smith played really well throughout that first round, except that giveaway that we don't want to talk about in that first game. So, looking at the whole series, he was pretty good. If you look at the entire series as a whole, Jacob Markstrom, I mean, what can you say about him? Vezina Trophy finalist. I don't know if he'll win it, but Shesterkin probably's got that in the bag, but heck of a season, heck of a series he had in the first round. Jim, we'll go to you first. What do you think Mike Smith will be like in this series? I mean, again, he's kind of an up and down. You're not sure what you're going to get with him every game.
He's been really good. You know what I mean? Like, to the point where you're like, man, maybe he's here to show up. And this sounds strange, but I think the giveaway in game one helped him. Yeah. I think it was a huge mistake, and it made that series go way longer than it probably should have, but it taught him a very valuable lesson, which is, I think I know what I can do. And I know that I'm probably the best puck handling goalie in the league, but this isn't the time for that. Right. Like he probably learned very painfully that there are certain things he shouldn't try. And that was, a crappy way to learn that lesson, but he learned it, and he was really, really good in the rest of the series after that. There wasn't too many games where he let in a bunch of squeakers, and that tends to be Smith's thing. When he's really good, he's super good. And when he isn't on his game, he looks out of position. He looks floppy. He doesn't look like, but he has seemed zoned in and mentally there and super competitive all series long. His numbers are not that much lower than Markstrom, to be honest with you. So it's a pretty good matchup if Mike Smith is on his game. Markstrom's consistent, right? Like he's the guy that you don't have to worry about. So Calgary's not probably going, oh man, what happens if he lets us down? Whereas if Mike Smith isn't there, then you're like, man, we got to go to Koskinen. How's that going to look, right? Like Koskinen can be good, but he's 50-50 bet at best, right? So you don't really know. Mike Smith needs to show up. If he shows up and he's there and he's mentally checked in and ready to go, it could be quite a duel, a battle between these two.
Yeah, Colton, I mean, Markstrom's been really good for the Flames all season long, and he was good in that first round. Do you think he can keep that going against the Oilers? I mean, high-powered offense, and he may be bombarded, but I mean, if the Flames play good defensively, he probably won't be. But what do you think? How do you think he'll do in this series?
I mean, I don't expect him to post the same numbers he had in this Stars series. Just I think the Flames did a good job in front of him. The Stars didn't generate a ton of offense, but that being said, whenever they needed a key save, he was there for them as he was throughout the whole season. So I think if he just keeps kind of doing his thing, I think that if anything, he might have just got a little bit more rest last round, really, because like I said, wasn't tested a ton. So I think that'll be big. And then, like Jim said, I do think Mike Smith is better than given credit for a lot. I think sometimes he has that tendency to let in those squeakers and maybe a bit of an unorthodox style, which I think has some kind of questioning him more than he's deserved. So I do think that the goaltending matchup would be closer than some think, but Markstrom's just given fans no reason to doubt him, and I think he'll keep it up through the second round.
Yeah, I mean, I have experience watching Markstrom in Vancouver here, and he's such a good goaltender. And if Demko wasn't coming up, he would probably be here right now. So let's do some X factors in this series. I mean, of course, we all know guys like Fernando Pisani is one I always bring up, because a guy that just never did much in the regular season, he goes and scores 14 goals in the playoffs. Jim, what do you think an X factor could be in this series? A player that could just come out of nowhere, like a Nick Paul that did in that Game 7 in Tampa.
If I have to pick a player, because I have an X factor that isn't actually a player, and maybe
or you could do that too.
Well, no, that's okay. Maybe I'll cheat and I'll do two. But for a player, for me, it's Ryan McLeod. Here's a guy who's not quite in your top six, but can be elevated in your top six if there's an issue for the Oilers or there's an injury of some kind. He's super fast. He's kind of controlling your second power play unit. If the Flames are getting power plays, if they get super emotional and Tkachuk is pissing people off or Rasmus Anderson is doing whatever he's going to do, the Oilers will probably get some power plays, and they're going to need a second power play unit to be good. Ryan McLeod kind of runs the show for that second power play unit. He's also a penalty killer. He flies through the neutral zone. He has the ability to slot up there and score every once in a while. If he has a decent series and is as consistent as he seemed to be against LA, where he's not making rookie mistakes and he's doing, like, he didn't do those things in LA, which you would expect of somebody who's never been in the playoffs before. He was really good. And so if he can continue to do something like that, that gives the Oilers a weapon on that third line that they really need. And I think that could be a massive key, because the Flames are only going to be able to shut down two lines on a regular basis, right? And if McLeod can run that third line and give that third line some offense, I think that could be a difference maker for the Oilers.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, McLeod has been really good throughout the season, and his speed could really add a different wrinkle to the Flames, having to defend. So we'll see what happens with him. Colton, what do you think an X factor could be for Calgary? I mean, there's a lot of players that didn't really do a lot of scoring in that first round. mostly because of Ottinger, but who do you think could be an X factor in this series?
Yeah, I'll say Dylan Dubé. I'd mentioned earlier that he did go goalless in the series, and I think for a couple of years in Calgary, fans were kind of waiting for him to break out. Like had good numbers in junior, was successful in the American Hockey League, and then really took some time. It seemed like him and Sutter weren't exactly on the same page, but he finished the regular season really strong and is a guy that I think can be elevated up in the lineup, like Jim said with McLeod if need be. And yeah, just with his strong end to the season, and he played actually pretty well in the first round, all things considered, even though he really wasn't successful in the score sheet. And I think he's a guy that could really kind of pick things up in the second round for the Flames.
Yeah, there's another guy that has a lot of speed too. So yeah, it's going to be a fun series for that, a lot of reasons. So we'll see who comes to play and steps up that you don't always expect to, but it's going to be fun. I'll ask the question here. Jim, we'll start with you. The Oilers will win this series
if they can keep their emotions in check. This is a Battle of Alberta, so I expect it to be super emotional and physical and whatever. But the one game the Oilers did not do very well in this season was a game against Calgary where it got away from them because they got wrapped up in the fact that they were playing Calgary. They walked away from the system that was working under Jay Woodcroft. It was like kind of the first real blowout for him as head coach, and the Oilers did not look good. It was not a pretty game at all. They need to avoid that at all costs during the playoffs. They need to play the system that Woodcroft has shown them works. They need to do their thing while knowing they're in the Battle of Alberta with Calgary, and they're going to have to hit, and they're going to have to be physical and fast and score and do all the things that have worked for them. But they can't let the idea that they're in the Battle of Alberta playing Calgary let them get away from what's been working for them, because they have been one of the best teams over the last 25 games of the regular season. And kind of going into the playoffs, been playing their system, and it's working, even though the LA series went longer than it should have. So I think if they can stay within what has worked for them and don't let it get away from them and get wrapped up and caught up in the whole, this is Calgary we're playing situation, they should be okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, it's going to be a real emotionally charged series. I mean, the rivalry and all that stuff, the fans, it's just going to be insane in both arenas. So yeah, they can't get drawn into that for sure. Colton, the Calgary Flames will win this series if?
Kind of a similar answer to Jim, but just in the opposite way. I think throughout the season, the Oilers are a team that really just scored a lot of goals, and they kind of like to open things up. Whereas the Flames, obviously, they can put the puck in the net. They showed that lots this season, but I think Sutter really kind of still preaches a defensive first mindset. You've seen that in that Dallas series with all those low scoring games, and they were able to win that. So I think as long as they don't get sucked into trying to kind of play a run and gun game against the Oilers, if they just stay in the systems that they showed all season long, I think they're one of the most consistent teams from game 1 through game 82. So I think if they stay with those systems, they'll be successful.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, they were just so good during the regular season. Like you said, very consistent, didn't have a lot of those long losing streaks, and which was key for them to be the Pacific Division winners or champions there. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this goes, because it's going to be just fun to watch for the fans and for everyone here. So let's get some final predictions on who's going to win this series, what it's going to end up as. Jim, what do you think this will go at?
I'm going to say the Oilers in 7. I think it's going to be another long series, but there's a big asterisk beside that, and that is if Leon Draisaitl can play the whole series. If he's in the games and he's healthy enough to play and he doesn't look like he's hobbling all over the ice and has to have his minutes knocked down to 20 minutes a game, that's a backbreaker for the Oilers. But if he's playing the whole series and he looks like he's like 80% of Leon Draisaitl, I think the Oilers could take this in 7.
7 games. That's where I go. I'm going 7 games. It doesn't matter who wins. It's going to 7. Colton, what do you think this series will end as? This Battle of Alberta we haven't seen in a long time.
I think it'll be a really good series too. I think it's one that could go either way. Like, obviously both teams are highly skilled. They both have their own things that they're better at than the other, but I just think the Flames are too deep of a team in all 3 positions. So I'm going to take the Flames in 6.
Flames in 6. All right. I'm going to say, I'm saying Flames in 7. I think it's going 7, but I think the Flames are a bit more. But like I say, that's an asterisk too. I think if Draisaitl is healthy and doesn't have that, limited, I think the Oilers taking the 7. So I'm wishy-washy on it, but I'll go Flames in 7 right now.
Well, if it helps you, I think I read somewhere that Wayne Gretzky picked the Flames. But I don't know what that means. What's he doing? But apparently, the Flames could have the Oilers number, so it wouldn't shock me at all if the Flames do end up taking this series.
Yeah, well, it's going to be fun either way. So thanks, Jim and Colton, for coming on. I'm sure you guys are going to have fun covering this series as it goes. So lots of content, lots of storylines as we go through here. So thanks for coming on and doing a preview for this series that starts tomorrow. So we're recording it today and also coming out today. So whenever it starts on what day is it today? It starts on Wednesday. So it's going to be a fun series to follow for any fan of hockey in general. If you don't have a team in the playoffs, watch this series because it's going to be really good, just for being a fan of hockey. So make sure you're following these two on thehockeywriters.com for all the coverage of this series. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe to this YouTube channel as we keep getting these previews out. We got one more coming out soon tomorrow. So make sure you're following this channel for everything. And thanks for joining us for another preview. We will see you next time.